Okay, hi everyone. My name is Rebecca. I'm just going to start out by letting you guys know that feel free to ask questions at any time. We love questions, and after the presentation, we're going to do a Q&A at the end. So if you have a question anytime, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll try as hard as I can to get to as many of them as possible at the end. So feel free to put that in at any time. Please stay till the end because for those that are still here, we're going to have a drawing for some awesome prizes, but you have to be present to win. Also, the webinar will be recorded and it'll be available on YouTube tomorrow. So if you want to watch it back or anything like that, it will be available for recording there. And Picmonic will also email you the link, so you'll have that there. And then finally, also stay tuned for the end because I'm going to have a special promotion for you guys. Usually the regular discount affiliate link is for 20% off, but for the next 24 hours only, you guys can receive 30% off. So it's a better deal than you can usually ever get. So you also want to stay for the end to get that. So first, just to start things off, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca. You might know me from @RebeccaWestCoastPA on Instagram. Feel free to follow me there. I'm originally from Seattle, Washington, and then I went to undergrad in Los Angeles at LMU. I was a health and human science major. I then took a year working as a medical assistant in Los Angeles. I worked for allergy immunology and sleep surgery, ENT, the main things I did. I also was a PT aide and a couple other things. During that year, I also applied to PA school. I applied and interviewed at 3 schools. I was accepted and started at Pacific University, where I currently attend, which is in Oregon. I started during the pandemic and finished didactic, and I am now in my clinical year, and I'm currently out on rotations. Right now, I am on my internal med rotation in Miami, Florida. So that's where I am right now. That's why I'm at a coffee shop. So yeah, and I discovered Picmonic through classmates and utilized that for farm and different things during didactic especially. And so yeah, that's kind of how all of this got started. But now we'll get started on the presentation. Let's pull up those slides. And then the screen will be shared in one moment. Okay, very good. Can everyone see the screen? Okay, good. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the 5 mistakes you're making when preparing for the PANCE. Here's my Instagram. Okay, so the first mistake we're going to discuss is using too many resources. So sometimes in PA school, you tend to be inundated with all these different resources, different professors, different outlets. You have question banks, you have study resources like Picmonic. There's so many out there. I'm sure you guys have heard of a lot of them. But a problem is you don't want to use too many. A lot of the times when you study something, let's just say you have something on a page and you're taking a test, you might remember what part of the page it's on. That might kind of help you remember it. So if you use too many different resources, that can kind of be confusing and almost hinder you because you're kind of having too many different ways that it's explained. Not to say you can't use more than one, you just want to make sure you're limiting yourself to the ones that are most effective for you and the best use of your time. I recommend having kind of a go-to for content and having a go-to for a question bank. So content is kind of how like you're learning it, and a question bank is how you're testing yourself. That's something like Rosh Review, for example. So you want to have something that you're studying the content, but you also want to have something where you're kind of reviewing and practicing questions, especially for a test like the PANCE, because that's really what that is. It's a bunch of questions. You don't know what you're going to get. So a great way to prepare yourself for that is to take as many practice questions as possible. So you want to find what those resources are for you, find your go-tos, have your best way that you learn. Maybe for some of you that's videos, maybe for some of you that's Picmonic, maybe for some of you that's however you did it during didactic. Maybe you had really condensed outlines. But have that on lock, and then a question bank. I like Rosh Review and New World, but there's plenty of question banks that exist out there. TrueLearn is another one. And then for mistake number 2, we'll go ahead and go to that slide. Okay, So mistake number 2 is going to be using only one resource. So kind of to juxtapose the first one, you don't want to kind of put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Perhaps that resource doesn't encompass everything you need to know. It might not encompass, what the PANCE question is on. So to just use one and one specific study style is also a little bit risky. So don't only use one thing. And at the very least, you want to have, again, something for content and something for questions. And also, kind of keep in mind what your school taught you. And then you might be looking at a book like PANCE Prep Pearls. Sometimes there's differences, right? And so now that it's the PANCE and it's the national exam, your school's no longer writing those exams. So it's going to include perhaps other things. So using the other resource can be helpful. And then we can go ahead and go on to number 3. Okay, mistake number 3 is going too in depth. So what this means is you don't want to get too in the weeds. Sometimes when you're studying medicine in particular, you can really go super far in depth. Sometimes this is helpful for like in clinic, or if you're working for like a specialty clinic in particular, that's when studying in depth is a good thing. When it comes to something like a standardized exam, particularly like the PANCE, you don't really have the time to go into great detail for everything. You don't have time for it, and it's also not where your time is best spent, even if you did have that time, because they're not going to ask about a minute detail of something. So you need to be able to see what's kind of the big picture, and kind of what questions would be on, as opposed to these fine details that are, although valuable to know for medicine, not necessarily what PANCE is going to ask about. So for example, something that might be good to study is what differentiates a disease. So if you have 3 diseases, you don't need to know every fine detail of each disease, but if there are 3 kind of similar diseases, what's the differentiating factor? Like if we're like a choledocholithiasis and a cholelithiasis, like all those different things, they're similar, but what's the key difference? A key lab value or feature perhaps. So knowing a differentiator is more important than knowing all the fine details of each thing. Sometimes you don't have the time for that, and that's kind of what's going to be able to parse through you looking at the answer options and being able to ideally get to the correct answer. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and go on to mistake number 4. Okay, and mistake number 4 is studying your worst subject first. So there's a lot of people that plan out kind of their study plan for the PANCE, and they're like, I'm really bad at cardio. I want to study cardiology first, and then study cardiology. They feel okay about it, and they study every single thing else, and they take their test. But now the thing that was your worst subject is the farthest away from the exam. So although it makes sense, you want to prioritize your worst subject and spend a good amount of time on it, you don't want it to be the farthest away from you taking that test, because then you're just going to forget it. So you need to maybe either put it closer, but I wouldn't also put it, right before the test either. So maybe about midway for your hardest subjects, and then also review those again. Or maybe you do want to do it earlier on, but just review your hardest ones again closer to. And in addition, you just want to kind of actually plan that out. Like the order of the subjects that you're studying does matter. Some might make sense to study earlier based off how good you are at them, or maybe it kind of leads into the next subject. Like for example, maybe you want to study like infectious disease type of stuff earlier, because that's going to be spreading across a lot of other body systems. So in general, kind of strategically picking the order, but also don't just drill your worst ones first and then forget about it. So that's something you want to avoid. Okay, next mistake, bad timing. So this is meaning in a couple of ways. So one, for studying, meaning you don't want to study too late. You don't want to study too early and forget. So timing your studying well. Kind of what I said for the last one, make an actual plan, write it out. I'm going to study cardiovascular system in these 2 weeks. I'm going to study this system in these 4 days. Actually kind of write out the order in your plan to fit in all of those subjects before your PANCE start date. And also you should have an idea of when that start date is. So just timing while you're studying. And then in addition to that, timing on when you schedule your exam. So everyone knows their graduation date, that's set far in advance. Usually people take the PANCE anywhere from a week after graduation to a month after graduation. I'd say that's pretty common. So you also want to have good timing for that. You don't want to do it right after graduation and then you have no time to study and you feel very stressed out. At the same time, you don't want to do it so far out that you kind of lose motivation. Everyone in your class is already taking the test and you just want to get it over with. So you also want to time well for when you pick your PANCE date. And then from there, you can also plan your studying accordingly, backtrack from there. And then finally, bad timing for exam taking. And what I mean by this is when you're actually taking the exam and you have 1 minute per question. So you could know everything and know all of medicine ever and have bad timing during the exam and still not do very well. So the average is 1 minute a question is how the exam is spaced out. You really want to be taking a little bit less than that because you don't want to get to the very end and not have any time. So if you don't know a question, flag it, move on. It's kind of hard because sometimes, you kind of want to think through it, but you really need to kind of keep on yourself with keeping to that timeline. And that is so critical because if you get behind, that's going to be just as bad as, completely not studying a subject. So that's something you really want to be mindful of, but also practice. So it goes back to the question banks. You shouldn't just be practicing questions, practice timing yourself. You should also try to practice timing yourself in the same method that the PANCE does, with the same amount of break time they give you, the same amount of questions, same amount of blocks that they give you, and kind of duplicate that scenario so you can see like, okay, I have this longevity to answer this many hundred of questions, and I can still keep on that 1 minute per question timeline. So kind of just going through the motions of that so you can feel like it's not a brand new feeling when you get to testing day and just kind of be prepared in that way. So those are the 5 major mistakes that people make. So just to try to be prepared as much as possible in those ways. But yeah, we'll go to questions now. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So feel free to put any questions in the chat. It could be about this. It could be about anything at PA school. It could be about rotations. It can be about really anything. So feel free to put those in. Thanks for listening. Oh, and also if we could pull up that last slide one more time. I also just want to point out this link on the bottom. It is 30% off for 24 hours only, like I said, and Picmonic also put it in the chat. But you can go ahead and go to that link for an added 30% off Picmonic, the next 24 hours only. Also, if you have any questions that you think of later on, feel free to DM me on Instagram. I always respond. So feel free to also ask the questions there if you can't think of any right now or you're watching this later. It looks like I do have one question in the chat. How is it that I found a rotation in Miami? I actually didn't find this rotation myself. My program is a traveling rotation program, and so they actually placed me here. I did express interest in traveling and coming to Florida, and I got it. So they had an affiliation here that already existed, and they sent a couple students here each rotation slot. So I got some here, but I also expressed that I wanted to come here, so kind of worked out. Okay, next question. Do you have recommendations about setting up clinical rotations? I have contacted about 20 places so far and I have been denied or no answer. I have set up 2 of my rotations. You don't have to set up your rotations. In fact, I'm pretty sure through RPA, your school has to be willing to set up your rotations, but some people elect to set up their own because maybe you want one in a certain area, maybe you want one near your home. That's why I set up one, because I wanted some in a certain area. I did have decently good luck. But one of the ones I set up was a connection, like it was an own personal provider that I had. That's definitely the easiest way is go through a connection or your parents or your friends, like, hey, what PAs, NPs, doctors do you have? And remember that any provider can be a preceptor, it doesn't have to be a PA. So just kind of using your resources. And then other than that, the other ones I set up was 100% from cold calling. You can also use networks on Facebook. A lot of times there's pre-PA groups for the area. Instagram has a huge pre-PA network that I'm also a part of. So I would recommend going through those outlets. Cold calling is hard sometimes, but just kind of explain yourself. Be like, I'm a student. I'm really interested in rotating here. Do you ever take students on a clinical rotation? I also like to explain that not only are you learning, but you're also an asset to the clinic or the hospital, that you can help out with patients, that you're very qualified to assist in their patient load. And that's another good thing to bring up. Okay, how do you prepare for clinical rotations? I'm worried about retaining all this information when we're bombarded with right now during didactic and not being able to recall it at the right time, and also for during pimping. Okay, so yeah, so for clinical rotations, very different than didactic in terms of just how it's structured and everything. And you're still learning, but you're learning in a completely different way. So for me, I didn't really do anything acutely to prepare, because we had a summative exam right before clinicals, which was basically an exam of every didactic module and subject of the whole year right before clinicals. So by studying for that, I by proxy was preparing for clinicals. But I mean, you'll see when you're out in clinicals, a lot of clinical medicine is different than didactic medicine. Like, it's just true. And you'll be told that you'll have your clinical brain, and you'll have your like test taking didactic brain. It's just a little bit different. There's certain things you do by the book, or like things you learn, but in practice you do it a little bit differently. So you also have to accept that you're not going to be able to prepare for all those things for a clinical year. That's kind of something you learn as you're in it. You'll be surprised how many preceptors really don't expect you to know much. Like, they realize you are a student. They're here to take you under their wing and teach you what they know. And a lot of them are very, very nice, and they want you to, try your best to answer these questions and everything. But if you don't know something, don't be afraid to say, I don't know that, but I will look it up and I will get back to you when I do, or I'll tell you tomorrow after I research that more. Usually pimping is pretty innocent. They just want you to learn. They want to see where your knowledge is and kind of help you figure out, what you need to go learn more about. But don't be afraid if you don't know something. It's very normal. Everyone doesn't know the answer to questions. But as far as like preparing, I mean, depending on what rotation you're in, I would do it differently. Surgery, I would practice some sutures, or before the ED, I would practice some sutures. Like, those kind of things are good. And maybe you could look over like general common conditions of that rotation. But again, I wouldn't be too worried about it. They really do ease you in. You really do kind of become a part of that and learn as you go. How are EOR exams different from didactic exams? I'm actually not a great person to answer this question, because we do not have EOR exams at my school. We actually just do rush review at the end of each rotation. So we basically like have a set of question bank just to practice for the PANCE. We don't actually have like an actual EOR. So I don't really know how they're different. But from what I've heard through the PA community that I'm a part of, is that they are similar, but it really depends on the school, if your school writes their own, so on and so forth. But if your school wrote their didactic exams, wrote their EOR exams, you can expect them to be similar, just probably strictly vignettes, strictly clinically based is going to be more likely, and usually based off the rotation you're on. But again, I don't have EOR exams, so take it with a grain of salt. Okay. Also, we've got 10 more minutes for questions. Feel free to pop the rest of yours in. Next one is, do you have clinical rotations elsewhere in Florida? I do not. This is my only one. I finished in about 2.5 weeks, finishing internal med. But that's the only one I have in Florida. But my next ones are going to be all in different areas as well. So. Any other questions? We'll give it another minute, and then we can also do the drawing for those that are still here for the prizes. Okay, next question. Is your school helping you with funding with all these different rotations? No. Well, yeah, I mean, no, they don't pay for you to fly to Florida, or they don't pay for your housing per se. But I will say it is included in your cost of attendance. Like every possible thing you pay for it can be covered by your loans. So you're not going to just not have a way to pay for it. Like there is an outlet to pay for it. And they have help. They have like an extra fund for like COVID extra expenses that they do give out to students, like quite a few extra scholarship things going on. In addition to that, we do have a housing sheet, like basically like an Excel sheet. And our program's been around since the 90s, which is fairly long for a PA program. So for the last, over 20 years, everyone that's stayed anywhere has listed that as like a housing contact. So some it's like parents of students that graduated 10 years ago. And a lot of these on this housing sheet, it's like highly affordable. Like they know they're renting out to students that need housing that are here for rotation. So that kind of helps keep the costs lower. And I think they have like an affiliation with car rental places in certain cities that they send a lot of students, like stuff like that. But they don't like straight up pay for it per se. Okay. Any last questions on rotations, elective rotations, favorite rotations, didactic year, testing? Okay, feel free to still put that in there, and I'm going to announce who the winners were. Let's see. Okay, for the 1-year Picmonic subscription, we have Mercedes Castillo. Congratulations. And for the True Learn Smart Bank of your choosing, another question bank, as I was saying, very helpful. That's going to be Nicholas Briggs. Congratulations, guys. And Picmonic will reach out to you about those. And also don't forget, if you need a discount on Picmonic, you have that link. And feel free to message me if you have any other questions.